Welcome back, and in today's video we're going to cover how to think during a chess game. And this is for anyone who ever feels stuck or runs out of ideas or doesn't know what their next moves should be in chess. Hopefully this framework can help you out. And we're going to cover this in three parts. Firstly, how to think during the opening, then how to think during the middle game, and last but not least, how to think during the end game. And before we crack into it, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Philip. I'm a 2100 FIDE rated player from New Zealand, and I make these videos to help you improve your chess and get to 2000 ELO and beyond. So if you get value from these videos, subscribe, like, all that good stuff. Now let's get into it. So first thing is the opening. The three key things we want to keep in mind in the opening, and this is how we know we've successfully played the opening, is we want to control the center, we want to get our pieces out, and we want to get our king to safety. Those are the three objectives in the first 8 or 10 or 12 moves in the game. So let's take a look at this example. This is the Queen's Gambit declined. You can kind of see both sides are vying for the center. No one's playing random moves like h6 or g6 or h5 or anything like that, because that doesn't really do much. Instead, we are trying to get our pieces out and control the center with our pawns. One extra for experts note is try get your knights out before your bishops. So in this case, black's going to play knight b to d7. The reason is, and this is a loose rule of thumb, so it's going to vary game to game, but getting your knights out, there's only a few good moves for the knights. So for instance, these kingside knights pretty much, I'd say, belong on f3 and f6. You're rarely going to put them on e2 or h3. So if you know that that's the best square for your knights, you may as well just put it there. However, for bishops, bishops have more options. So you want to hold back and see how the other pieces sort of land before deciding where to put your bishop. So here we can put our bishop on g5, on f4, or maybe even on b2. And likewise, black might want to play this bishop to e7 or b4, or play something like c5, and then the bishop might land on c5 after the pawns are traded. So get your knights out first. Bishop g5 is the main move, bishop e7, e3. White's plan is clear. He's going to play bishop to d3 and then castle. Black castles, again getting the king to safety. And here, after rook c1, c6, and bishop d3, we sort of reach a point in the opening where white's next move naturally is going to be to castle, and we'll essentially be out of the opening. So let's just play a couple more moves to see what happens from here, because we'll get into the middle game from here. D takes, bishop takes d4, c4. One thing I should just say is try not to move the same piece twice in the opening. Here, white couldn't really avoid it because he needed to get that bishop out in order to get that king to safety. You can't really hold off for too long, so white has to move that bishop twice. But play continues. It's not the end of the world in this case, but again, you don't want to be randomly moving this knight back and forth as black or anything like that, or knight e2, knight g, all of this kind of stuff you want to avoid. Just get your king to safety, get your pieces out, control the center. So now we're getting into the middle game. Black has played knight to d5. Now our bishop is attacked, so we're going to have to trade. The queen takes, and black has sort of gotten his queen to a nice square, and here we are going to castle. Now let's pause for a second. It's black's move, and we're starting to get into the middle game phase. It's move 11, and in the middle game phase, these are the things you want to think about. The number one practical bit of advice I can give you is you want to think, what are the best squares for my pieces? If that's the only thing you think about during the middle game, it'll help you a lot, because that's the key way to improve your position, is by putting your pieces on better squares. So let's take a look at it from black's perspective. Black would say, my knight on d5 is on a good square, I don't want to move it. However, my least active piece is that bishop on c8, and not only is it the least active, but it's going to be really hard for me to get it active because it's on the same color as my pawns, same color squares, and it's also blocked by this knight on d7. So how can I get this bishop out? If I can't get this bishop out, I can't get this rook out. If I can't get this rook out, then I'm going to be playing without a bishop and a rook while white just continues to improve their position. So black has to realize that having a bit of a cramped position is not good. So black is going to want to play e5 or c5. However, black can't play e5 instantly because white's going to take on d5 with this bishop. And after the trades, white is just winning. He's won a pawn, he's probably going to win a second pawn soon, and black is lost in this position, or losing. So instead, black thinks, I'm going to take white's knight, and now I'm going to play e5. So now black is solving the issue of having a cramped pawn structure and getting his pieces out. And after the trades here, queen takes e5, you can kind of see black's bishop is now free to move to f5 or e6. And this is really good for black. Black has solved most of his problems, but it all starts with recognizing, what do I need to do to improve the position of my pieces? Here, if black played something like h6, white might think, okay, how can I prevent black from playing e5? I could probably move my knight to e5, or I could play knight to e4 so that this knight can't trade my knight on c3. There's many ways where black can slip up by not recognizing that the main plan is to play e5 or c5, which essentially leads to getting that light squared bishop out. So that's how you can start going backwards and going wrong if you don't identify the correct plan in your position. But again, identifying the correct plan is as simple in a lot of times as thinking, are my pieces on good squares? How can I put them on better squares? Which pieces are least active? How can I make them more active? So that's how you want to think about your position. So after this trade, black has unraveled, and now it's white's turn to play. The next thing we want to think about in the middle game is, what are the weaknesses in each side's position? So this is a pretty balanced position. There's not too much happening. It's a pretty equal setup, not many weaknesses. But let's think, what could be a weakness? Well, this b2 pawn could be a weakness because this rook is pinned. If this rook moved to d3, we'd lose a pawn straight away. That's not good. Likewise, black might have to be careful on that b7 square, because if the bishop moves, that pawn is going to be undefended. Another weakness for black is this f7 square, where if black's not careful, white could start applying some pressure. And where does white want to move his pieces? This rook definitely wants to move to d1, but the queen's in the way. So how can we think of a move for white that captures all of those things in one go? Well, the move is queen to b3. And if you think about the beauty of this move, is we don't have to calculate anything, but through logical positional thinking, this is the best move for white, because we're protecting this b2 pawn, we're freeing up this d1 square for a rook to land on an open file. We are stopping black's bishop from moving, because if the bishop moves now, we can take that pawn on b7, and we're doubling up the pressure on that f7 square. So black cannot move this rook now, because we're going to take that f7 square, f7 pawn. So with no calculation, again, we have stumbled upon the best move for white, not queen to d2. That's another option we could play, but queen to b3 is the best one. And here, as black, again, we want to think, what can we play to help us unravel? And the best move is, funnily enough, rook to b8, because then we want to move the bishop to e6 or f5 and get unraveled that way. However, if we don't pay attention to our position well, black might play something like b5, thinking, I'm going to win a tempo and then get my bishop out. The problem is, here you have created a weakness on c6 on your pawn structure, and now white is just simply going to play queen to c2 back there. Essentially, we're threatening to win that h7 pawn, and after g6, rook c5, queen e7. Let's take stock of this position. Black has actually ended up with a cramped bishop on b7, a weakness on c6, weak dark squares here on f6 and h6 because of this g6 pawn move, and this d-file maybe down the line, d6, c5, they're weak dark squares in black's position as well. So we've already landed a rook to c5. Our next move is going to be bishop to e4, and we're threatening to win that c6 pawn. We're threatening to cramp up the position with b4. We're going to get our rook on c1 or rook to d1, get a bit of lift for our king, and it's a very easy position for white to play. But it all started with, you know, logical thinking, trying to put our pieces on the best squares, and everything just sort of flows from there. So now, just for the essence of time, let's move on to endgames. And endgames are where there's fewer pieces left on the board. The key 3 principles that you want to keep in mind for endgames are activate your king, activate your pieces and keep your pieces active, and look for ways to create passed pawns. So passed pawns are pawns that are unobstructed, like this b pawn, and can turn into a queen. And this is a classic example of somewhere down the line, you know, it's equal material, but somewhere down the line, black has not followed those rules. They have not activated their king. They have not activated their pieces. I mean, this rook is tied to the defense of this pawn from queening the whole time. This king is going to be tied to the defense of the h7 pawn because white's going to play rook to h1 now. And black is in trouble because white's king is just going to dance into the position. This pawn is going to become a queen, and black's going to have to sacrifice that rook. So black is dead lost in this position, even though it's equal material. And just to show you an example, king c5, you know, after king g7, black might realize that, I might actually need to give up this h7 pawn because my king is better off on this side of the board. So king f7, rook takes, king e6, b7, and now there's nothing black can do to prevent the white king from coming to c7. Let's say bishop c2 is played, king b6, king d7, check, the king has to move, and then we are going to win the game. So where did black go wrong? Now let's take a step back, and this is, if anyone can notice, it's actually this game, but a little bit earlier in the game. So in this position, it's quite even. It's actually a 0.3 advantage for white, so a slight advantage for white, but heaps for black to do. White in this position played c5, again trying to play c6, and then after the trades we have a passed d pawn, or b pawn rather. Here black should play rook to d7, because what this does is it essentially is activating the rook. So the rook could come to d4, where it starts stopping this pawn from moving to b4, or more importantly, we're going to put that rook to, I'll give you an example. Let's say if white played b4, we could play rook to d2, or we could play rook to d4. And now after something like, white's got to be very careful. If white plays rook to b1, black has tricks like e3, right? So we're going to play something like rook c4 in this case first, just so we don't run into our rook being attacked once the pawn gets taken on e3. And white finds himself with these pawns quite stuck. So rook b2, and it's very hard for white to make progress, and in fact black might actually be better because black's king is going to come into the position here and maybe start applying pressure on that b4 pawn. So this is how quickly things can turn around if you activate your pieces. Here white's gone wrong, and white's got a passive rook, whereas black has an active rook. And black's plan is, you know, naturally just to get the king active as well. However, in the position we looked at before, black didn't do that, and ended up with a passive rook and didn't get the king active, whereas white got the king active. White can, try get the king to f6 with mating threats even, or plain and simply we can just support the pawn here and win the game that way. So just to wrap up for the endgame, what you want to be doing is activating your king, getting your king to the center as quickly as you can. And just to give you one final example, this is a more balanced type of game. Pieces have been traded off. It's an endgame, and you can say white's got a slightly more active rook because he's got control of the c file, and black has a couple of weaknesses on d6 and b7 we can target. However, if white is silly, white will play something like rook to c7, which looks like a good move, looks like an active move, but in this position, black can play rook to d7. And after the trades, black is actually okay. Black has really good drawing chances, even though black has a weakness on d6. Black has increased their drawing chances because white has traded their active rook for black's passive rook, which is not good. So in this position, we will say we have a good rook. We don't want to trade it for black's more passive rook. We're just going to get our king active. So king to f2 is white's best move, and play continues. It is still a relatively equal game. White's got a slight advantage. Play will continue, but again, the play will revolve around who can keep their pieces active, who can get their king active and centralized, and then who can create a passed pawn. So those are the things you want to be thinking about in an endgame. Hopefully this video helped some of you think about chess in a little bit of a different way and help you think of moves to play during the chess game. There's going to be a couple of videos that pop up at the end of this video. Click on one of them. Hopefully you can continue your learning process through that. And yeah, see you guys in the next video. Peace out. Hope you enjoyed it.